This is LaunchLeft Podcast. I'm your host, Rain Phoenix. Today, our very special guest is Alex Ebert, launching Try. Don't forget, rate and subscribe. Follow us on all socials at LaunchLeft. Hello, Alex Ebert. Finally, I get you in the LaunchLeft room and a LaunchLeft podcast. I've been wanting to speak with you for a long time. I admire your music. I think everyone probably knows you from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros first. But you have done so much more than that and are so much more than that. And one of the things that I really admire about you is the thinker that you are. You're a philosopher and you care so much, so deeply about the environment and about other people and other beings. And so I just feel really blessed to have the opportunity to speak with you about the things that you're passionate about, because that's what we're all about here at LaunchLeft. We're not really like going to ask you the questions that a music magazine would ask you, or pretty much anything related necessarily to exactly what you've done in music. I'm not really interested in that. I've never been. I'm more interested in talking to artists about what fuels their creative and why they've chosen art as a means of expressing their pain, which is usually, to me at least, how art comes to be. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. That sounds wonderful. I can't wait to chop it up with you. Yeah, and it's good to see you after all this time.
Yeah, I know. You went and moved to New Orleans, which I love. I love so much, NOLA. I grew up in the South as well, so spent some time there, and it's such an amazing city. If you don't mind me asking, what made you go there?
It's funny, I grew up in the Valley in Los Angeles, and it's just, I always had this sneaking suspicion that there was more culture to be experienced than just a bunch of concrete, and that there was sort of a dense, throbbing, communal thing. My mom showed me this story I wrote when I was 6, and it goes, once there was a boy who had a crew. They also knew kung fu. They went around the world and blah blah blah. She showed it to me when I started Edward Sharpe. She's like, you've always wanted community and blah blah blah. I have this story, and she showed it. I was like, oh my gosh! Once there was a boy who had a crew. What a great start. And New Orleans had this this vibe that I'd only seen at like Disneyland. I for the first few years I was here, every time I walk around, I kept having to pinch myself and be like, no, this is real. This wasn't set up for tourists. These are real houses and real homes and architecture that's been around for several hundred years. And I don't know, there was a sense of like a lack of really living, quote unquote, that I always had as sort of like a white upper middle class kid growing up in the Valley. And this just struck me as just so rich. And we'd have time off during tour, so we'd come here, and we took this one tour with Mumford & Son and Old Crow Medicine Show in real trains. We got in these actual train cars from like the 1940s and went all the way from the Bay Area down through Marfa, Texas, through and ended up in New Orleans. And I think after that was sort of like, okay, I'm going to move here at some point. And then we were having a kid, me and my baby mama were having a kid. And she's like, I don't want to raise my kid in LA. I was like, okay. I think I got the place. And we came here, and I've been here ever since, which is weird to be in one place for so long for me. But yeah.
So I can relate to that sort of pilgrimage and also community. I've also been just always interested in the idea of people coming together, specifically the creative people artists intentionally coming together and lifting each other up. First of all, if you're out there listening or watching this, I thoroughly enjoy your Instagram. You always got such cool advice, whether it's recording or just like philosophical meanderings on very specific things that are really interesting.
Very
really
cool. Specific things.
Yeah. I know. I've been enjoying your stuff on AI and sort of the art of failure. Do you want to speak a little bit about that? Because that's so in the news right
Yeah,
now. Some of your opinions on AI
sure.
and how it affects artists.
Yeah, I was even thinking about, writing a Way of the Artist Part 2, because I think that, you know, so much of what I mean is fascinating, actually, the way that artists have been taught to do art, especially at the collegiate level, but even before then, is a lot of is everything that AI has been trained to do, that AI does flawlessly. Know your audience. All of these sort of modes of um, packaging, which streamline the artistic process and create a sort of implacable success, and heighten your chances for success by essentially stealing from your recent successes, building on them, and transforming them into commodities. And that's exactly what AI does. It's able to um, sort of scrape data in terms of audience consumption, take that scraped data, take all of the valuable successes of that data, and then create new pieces of art or writing or whatever they are based on the consumptive patterns of previous successes, and based on the intended audience that the AI is targeting. So all the things we've been trying to do, and only doing so well because we're humans, AI now does flawlessly. So everything artists have been taught is essentially going to be useless, because what we've been teaching ourselves is to create the most artificially streamlined and what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, anyway, the word is escaping me right now, but it's like one of those current just total buzzwords. But anyway, the point being that AI is the first invention that I can think of that is essentially limitless. Like when we think about AI, it's like, okay, cool. So what's the limitations? And we can say, well, it's not real or something, but it does affect real life. And is the mind real? So as AI as a mind, where are its limits? I can think of any other invention, the calculator, the wheel, the airplane. It's like, okay, there's the limit. I see the limits. You can feel the limits, touch the limits. AI is almost limitless. So when we think about being in competition creatively with AI, the only thing that I see playing to our advantage are our limitations. And there's this great quote by Brian Eno that I'm going to totally fudge right now, but it's something like, the only valuable aspects of every paradigm shift creatively are those aspects which have pushed the limitations of that particular medium to the point of the breaking point. So you have, for instance, guitar distortion, or you have the 8-bit sort of quality of the first cameras that came out, digital cameras came out, that now all the Gen Z kids want. You have like these limitations, the limitations of the art form themselves, the saturation points, distortion points, the all of that stuff end up becoming, as he says, I think, like the signature of that art form. And I think what we have to do is play with our own limitations. So we have these really great limitations at our disposal. Some of them we've previously seen as really negatives, like impatience. So impatience is a great motivator and differentiator from AI, because it creates a time constraints. So when we have everything at our disposal, like we have the computer and we're sitting there and we have like my studio's back there and I have every mic I could possibly want. I have infinite amount of recording time. I have all the instruments. Where are my constraints? Because that phrase, like necessity is the mother of invention, which is that post I made recently. It's really true. Like we create things, invent things because we need them, and because we have a moment of total necessity. And so we create something, and usually that necessity is created by constraints. Like, I don't have a tambourine present, so I'm gonna put a bunch of pennies in a jar and shake them up. and that'll be my sound. And it's a totally new sound. Or I don't have the time to mic this up properly, so I'm going to mic it from over here and create this improper failed sound. And that failure in and of itself is the new piece of art. It's the new contribution to the sonic palette of culture. And I think that, what I love about this, if AI is doing all those things, well, it turns out from my own point of view, all those things AI doing were the very things that were taking all of the heart out of art to begin with, and streamlining the process and making everything just so capitalistically driven and product driven. And instead, we get to now break things and fail and try off the wall oblique strategies that make things sound different and wrong. And it's those wrongnesses, that create the newnesses. Because otherwise, if we're always doing everything right, we're just going to end up with the same thing over and over again. So I think that there's a great opportunity here for artists to realize that the path that we'd been on is going to be totally overtaken by this machine learning process, and that the only things we're really going to be able to contribute. By the way, the argument that yeah, but we can still prompt the AI, that's just not a solid argument. I'm sorry for everyone out there. It's no, I'm still prompting it. There's already AI. The prompting is a gimme to get the thing to go viral. These large language learning machines don't need prompting. There's already self-prompting machines out there, self-prompting AI. They just scrape the data, give us what it assumes we want, which we do, and we don't have to prompt it. So that notion of we're going to use it ourselves and all that, I think, is sort of erroneous. The thing that we can do is fail in ways that AI is not capable of failing. We can assign our own limitations and create new works of art. And so the path of the artist, I think, is going to constantly be ahead of where AI is, so that we're forging new paths ahead vis-a-vis failure and via our own limitations and invention. And then AI is going to catch up to it, be oh shit, that's catching on. Let me imitate that. And then we're going to have to forge ahead again, and then again, and then again. There's always be the avant-garde. And I think that's sadly the only future for artists, given where we're at, and it's going to rapidly accelerate. It's crazy.
For all its dystopian implications, for some reason, that is an inspiring trajectory, as opposed to acquiescing to the status quo of a learned artist's existence and just making mediocre, along with the AI, making what is learned. And to me, it's always more interesting to be outside the box like that and to fail. This fear of failure that we have has paralyzed so many artists that I know, and myself included, throughout my life, because of what other people might think and whatnot. And I think exercising always our right to fail and fail better every time is innovative. And I personally love what you're talking about in terms of limitations as well, because, for example, the 4-track recorder, I made a record with that with one of my bands, and that was really an amazing exercise in limitation, and you only have what you have to work with. And I think that's good too, to not have everything at your fingertips all the time. But you're right in the way that humans and AI will never be the same in the fact that we are fallible.
Piggybacking on what you said, I think that the word I was looking for previously was optimization. And obviously so much of, this whole life hacking culture, all these hacks and shortcuts, and I'm going to, just hack the shit out of my life and create a hyper optimized living situation. And meanwhile, the scenic route is where all the gold is. And yet we're creating all these freeway shortcuts from one synapse to the other and one thing to the other. And we're not really taking the time to have happy accidents. And that's that's something that I think if there's one silver lining that AI is going to do by boxing us out of the optimization game, it's going to sort of force us to reconsider the scenic routes.
Wow, that was profound, and so glad I asked because really that gives me a lot of pause in that respect because we are so, in regard to optimization, yeah. The time, I don't know if you have this experience of time. Sometimes I just don't finish my sentences because I'm like jumping to the next idea. But it seems like it's speeding so very fast now. And even for my young nephews say that they feel that time, which is really what's alarming to me because I remember I was like, oh, if I was 18, I wouldn't think that, but actually, apparently it feels that way for everyone. So of course, this idea of optimization has come into play, which is like, oh my God, I'm going to die so soon. I got to do this quick, or I got to figure out how to hack. Right. But you're right. Like you potentially, there's this gold buried along the route that you're completely missing, and you arrive at the end to a sort of a desert with no water and no gold and no promise. You're launching Try, which is the wonderful Sam Spiegel. I don't know Shmuck the Loyal, but I'm looking forward to meeting him. I think you're involved with their project.
I mean, I've known Sam for a while, and he's always had really interesting projects that he's been working on, and I'm glad he's thought of me and looped me in on occasion. And this was one of those occasions. He's like, I'm coming out to New Orleans. Let's do this. Let's do it. And so he flew out, and I just walked in blind, and we just started messing around on this song, and yeah, we just had a really good time. Love hanging out with him in the studio, and that's sort of the extent to my collab with them. But yeah, I just
Cool.
really appreciate them. Yeah, I haven't met Schmuck myself. Schmuck.
Shall we welcome them and have a little
Yeah.
conversation? We were just talking about you guys and your amazing project. Listen to the EP, so good. Can you share a little bit about how this project came to be? Because I know
Schmuck and I met like around the end of 2019. We got introduced by my old manager Blade, who's still a very good friend, and we had a session in New York, and then the pandemic rolled around, and we just started like, I think we both were kind of cooped up and just feeling this. We were in this weird post-apocalyptic creative cocoon that I think I think it was hard for a lot of people to work, and then some other artists were just like felt like they just were like their hearts were like exploding in this weird vacuum of space, and we were both on that same vibe of just like, hey, let's make a lot of music. And I was collaborating with a few people. I was like, oh, this is such a cool time to collaborate with like a bunch of people online and make stuff and send stuff back and forth during this weird, unprecedented time. And then Schmuck and I just loved everything I was doing with him. And he was super proactive and just like me, and just was like, just exploding just like me. And we just kept making music. And then before we knew it, we were like, we kind of have a project. Like, this is actually a thing.
And where did you mostly work on it? Did you just fly back and forth, or did you send files?
So pretty much everything in the beginning was remote. And I think that was a really cool thing about just kind of the state of the world, is like, I really cut my teeth on the remote workflow. To me, at that point in my life, starting that out, that was like the most soulless way to make music with somebody, because so much of that like synchronicity that you have in the studio is like outside of just what you're working on. It's like catching up and getting to know somebody and like popping around the corner and grab some lunch and just like getting to know somebody on a very personal level in the same room. And so like, I think having a remote workflow at that point was very foreign to me for the most part, especially to the extent of us like getting a project together, and I really kind of fell in love with the oddities of that workflow. But yeah, to answer your question, it was pretty much all remote with the exception of stuff that we had started together in the same room. A lot of stuff was just like throwing paint on the walls. Like Sam would be like, what do you think about this? Like, here's a few riffs, and I take it and flip it and send him back something totally different. And then he'd play with it and send it back. And so in that way, it was almost like the approach was like kind of hyper focused, because like you sit down and there is no kind of like diddle daddling around what you're making. It's like kind of, you get to really focus on how to put your spin on something without that back and forth relationship of being in the room together. You know, so I think that that's been very interesting, is Sam and I's workflow has flip-flopped back and forth between these two worlds. And sometimes it's more remote and sometimes it's very in person. And a lot of the time it's this kind of hybridized approach where we're leaning into both of the interesting sides of those two worlds.
I love hearing about how, you know, one's hard-won opinion about something being bogus, like sharing files that, you know, through this process, you have a different opinion about that. And it's become something that became a rich part of your musical experience, something you prior would not have liked. You know, it's neat when that happens, I think, for artists.
And, you know, I think that that's a big part of art in general, is for a lot of mediums, it's breaking down those boring things that stand between you and the final product. Especially like, you know, I make a lot of music on a computer, and I'm also a firm believer that like every human being on this earth has the potential to make a beautiful painting and a really cool record and write an impactful piece of poetry, etc. It's those boundaries that lie between what's here and the manifestation of that, like learning the quick commands on a computer, you know, on your software, or like learning which brush like properly puts the right stroke down. It's those kind of in-between barriers that have to be broken down. And so I think it's really easy to look at something like sending files and Dropbox and emails as hampering the progression of the art. But ultimately, it's just another one of those things where it's like, once you kind of dig into it, you start to see that there's a little bit of a beauty in every different form of making art, you know?
It's funny. It's almost like you guys were eavesdropping on Alex and my conversation prior. We were talking about things like optimization and AI a little bit. And even though you weren't sharing that, you said something about like shortcuts and computers, and it reminded me of what we had been talking a bit about.
Just AI is doing all the things that we've been taught to do, like optimize the workflows and know your audience and target demographics and how to create success. You know, it's data scraping for everything and then spitting out everything everybody already wants to know and hear and asked for, and yet and doing it way better than we could. And so I'm just saying, the thing that we can do that AI can't is work within limitations and fail. We have the advantage of failure and happy accidents and mistakes and oblique strategies and that kind of thing.
I like that. I like that.
Speaking
Sam
of,
we were just talking about happy accidents the other day as Sam, as I won't talk too much about what we're working on right now, but
well, we can talk about it. We can talk about it. It's going to come out after I think it's coming out right after the podcast, right?
Yeah. So we have a very interesting project coming out that is diving into the world of AI in a video form. And it's really interesting because, you know, Sam has been, as we've been keeping up with how things are moving along, he's like, man, like, I'm so used to plotting out every single part, and there's just parts we just don't know what it's going to look like because we're waiting for this computer interpretation, basically, of Sam's wild vision. But there was like a little happy accident that happened in the edit. And Alex, to your point, it's like something that the AI would have never done. And I won't reveal what that was, but it ended up being something that we're like, oh, that's such a cool thing to integrate into the video that feels like human. And yeah, again, it's just something that within the limitations of what we have as human beings, there's always going to be these cool little wacky, quirky things that come out of it.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting because, yeah, the way we're making this video is, and there's never been like a full video that's been done like this to this point. We're shooting everything with like costumes, like really terrible costumes. If you were to look at this video, it would look like, as is pre-AI, it would look like it was shot on like a terrible blue screen stage with the worst 80s horror like special effects, like a terrible 80s horror special effects uh movie, like, and then we're basically overlaying everything with AI, both AI models of creatures and AI models of people, sometimes overlaying the actual people on themselves. um but yeah, like, exactly what Shmuck is saying. It's been a really interesting project. Yeah, we have no idea. Like, it's kind of like, all right, here's the theory behind the way it's going to work, and here's all the tools that people are using. We're working with some really amazing AI people who are right on the cutting edge of the tools, but there's a certain amount of, like, yeah, like normally, like, I'll draw like a board, and then I'll hold it up and it's a terrible drawing, but I'll look at it and I'll then look at the finished project and I'm like, oh yeah, that's like the same thing, and then this one, it's going to be like, who the fuck knows what it's going to look like. I'm hoping it's going to tell the story and have the feeling that we wanted to. But that's been really interesting. But yeah, and then the mistake that Schmuck's talking about is we're actually editing at the wrong aspect ratio while we were shooting it.
Wow.
And then, like, afterwards, we realized it, like, after days of editing, right towards the end, and then we finished the video in that aspect ratio, which was just 1:1, like a square. And then we were like, all right, let's do it in 4:3, what we were originally thinking. It's like the old TV aspect ratio, and then we're like, it's actually much more intimate as just a square, and we didn't, and so we ended up keeping most of it in this, like, original aspect ratio. But, like, to what you guys are all talking about, it's like, yeah, that was a mistake, and we're like, fuck, it's so awesome that mistake happened. It served the feeling and the idea so well.
I was gonna bring up something a lot more organic, which is, I know, Sam, that you had a baby, I think, during the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken, right? I know, Alex, you have a daughter, and I don't know, Schmuck, if you have a child, but my curiosity is around the idea of how children, like, do you feel that being fathers has changed your work, or has inspired your creativity in different ways? Has it made you more of a risk taker or more conservative? I'd love to hear from the fathers in the room. I'm so curious if you've noticed a change in how you are creatively.
I'll take a stab at that. I've been thinking about this recently. Um, and as with so many things I'm discovering as I get smarter, as I get older, there's these ironic inversions that happen. So for instance, I used to take music so seriously, especially my legacy and what does this song mean? And I got to be authentic. And what's the thing about? And everything was just serious. And I was working 18-hour days and wanting to be on my own sort of cutting edge, my own bleeding edge, my own avant-garde, whatever that meant to me. I wanted to be pushing myself and all that sort of thing. I woke up on the first of this last year, and this has something to do with being a father and understand, like, there's something about being a father that leatherizes you, sort of weatherizes you. It turns you into a piece of old bubble gum. You're just like this exhausted, but you get used to the exhaustion and you suddenly become this sort of like plastic, easy thing that can just kind of roll with every punch. Like, everything just becomes this leather daddy, sort of not that kind of leather daddy, but like leathered daddy, leathery daddy. And everything's just soft and easy. And I woke up this morning, the morning of the first, and I was like, you know what? I just had this sudden inspiration. I was like, everything is a hobby to me. Everything is easy. I'm just kind of gonna give up, like, the professionalism and go with pure hobby for everything. I started baking. I started doing all these random things, and life became a lot different and easier. But one of the ironic outcome, the ironic inversion for me, I started taking a lot more chances musically, because my legacy and my identity and all the meaning and authenticity, because it wasn't all wrapped up in every single word and every single note. And suddenly it was all just cool. and soft and easy and pliable. And I didn't care as much about what the outcome would be. And I think I think I was influenced to that place through being a dad in some way. In a lot of ways, like your legacy is kind of wrapped up in your kid. Like that's your actual legacy. And so after that, you can kind of just be like, okay, what are my hobbies then? And I feel a lot like kind of freed up to kind of just to fail, actually coming back to failure. So anyway, that'd be my answer at the moment.
Beautiful.
I like that. It's because that's almost when you're describing the way you're approaching your art, it feels like when somebody first like starts making art.
Yeah. Yes.
You're like, you don't really give a fuck. You're just like, oh, this feels good.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Well, I like that. It's like a rebirth of art as an artist, as a new artist.
Before you become trapped by your own identity as an artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And you're more and more like, well, I'm this, and that means I can't do that. But I mean, I think Alex has more years with his beautiful daughter than me. But you know, so my kid's only 2. But I think I'm still, I like your description of like the leathery dad, like, and just because it's just, there's so much stuff that you're like juggling all the time. I know exactly what you mean. Like where you're just like, okay, this is happening now. And I'm like, okay, hold it, hang on. I'm going to hold it. You know, like there's ability and pliability that didn't need to exist. But also like, I guess for me, and I don't know how much or how exactly this is affecting me as an artist, but like my kid, he's like so fucking stoked and so excited about stuff, and like and he gets like, he's just like, I don't know, let me think. It's like, there's an owl, there's a fucking owl outside, what the fuck? Oh, like and like, I don't know, I feel like just like being reminded how awesome and insane like the fact that we're even like here is, you know, and alive and humans and conscious, and that the world is so complicated and amazing. And I don't know, like I think kind of I somehow, and it's conscious too, but like it's conscious, I'm consciously aware of like wanting to be in find that and be in touch with that enthusiasm and that like inner child. And probably like I think lately, because we've been making all these videos, and so there's a lot of concepting out, and I'm probably a little bit more just like, oh, this field, it's probably is similar to what you're saying, Alex. It's like, oh, this thing is fucking weird, this idea is weird, and I'm just gonna, but it feels good and it'll be fun, and like that's what's happening. And
yeah, you know,
and also remember how the joy, just like remembering the yeah, to appreciate the joy, and you know, that's been a nice thing that may or may not have been influenced by X, but probably has quite a good deal.
So important. So that's so beautiful and profound. Joy to me right now, I mean, I think in any era, but it feels like more than ever with so much going on and so much uncertainty, you know, it is an artist's responsibility to create and cultivate joy and to share it. And that's something that we can do and that we do. And that's what, you know, that's what people go to music for, and to film and TV and whatever your art form is, you know, ultimately everyone wants to be happy. That we know to be true, right? So, and nobody wants to suffer or have their family suffer. So those truths mean like, well, if you can cultivate joy and make beautiful things that make people laugh, or just bring the energy of joy through a dark project, like the Honorable David Lynch, who I always cite as my favorite joy creator, even through his amazing dark films. And I'm so grateful that you know, you reached out and that you could be on the show all together, because this was a meaningful conversation. Is there anything you want to share? I feel that, you know, Try should share all the things, your socials, whatever you want to share about your collab with our audience.
I got one thing, just like, I mean, because we were just talking about the pandemic, and it's just kind of fun. Like, we were sending a bunch of music with people, but like Alex was the first, like literally the day that you could fly, I flew to New Orleans and worked with Alex. It was the first time I'd like been in the room with anybody, like, which was
Wow.
awesome. And it was so fucking fun. And we were in this like church studio, like in New Orleans, and everybody was just walking around. I had a great time just hanging down there. So that was pretty cool that we had been like able to be, I don't know, it was like the very first thing, because Alex is on the Tribe project. We haven't mentioned that, and he's on this great, it's a very, to me, it's like a New Orleans future, like funk song or weird psychedelic, and he's like almost like this weird psychedelic street urchin, like spirit warrior creature on it or something. I don't
I
know.
love that.
So that was fun. And yeah, and then right after that, like, talk about joy. Like, Shmuck, this dude is he's just so full of it, and just so fucking, oh man, just like, it's one of my favorite things about working with people that are full of excitement and joy. Is just the best. And I went, right after that, I went straight from Alex to go to work with Schmuck and Mickey Echo for our last single, Fire Sign. And that was like one of the greatest sessions of joyful people I've ever experienced. It was just like jumping and yelling the entire time. We were so psyched to be in the room together.
Yeah, that was like such a crazy time coming out of the like COVID era of making music. It's kind of like that was like the full circle from what we were talking about earlier about like embracing a new workflow and kind of like locking into your computer and your instrument and sending files. And then it was like, oh, right, this human element of harmony with somebody and like being in the same room. And like, Alex, I thought it was so interesting what you were saying about like the kind of rebirth of you as an artist after having a child. And I don't have children, but like I kind of had this moment at the end of 2020 where I feel like my hyperfixation on my work was like kind of a coping mechanism for me, right? Like I was like really laser focused on this efficiency of like make art every single day, you know? And
Yeah.
I had this like moment where like I just woke up one morning and I was just like, I don't use the word burnout. Like I don't believe in it. For me personally, it's just like sacrilegious in what I do as an artist. But I was burnt on this ideology that I had applied to my art. And I was like, I want to hold a baby animal and touch grass and like hug my friends and like be on a hill under like the full moon. I want to like get up and howl. And like, I want to reawaken the human inside of me that has been dormant and hyper focused on something that I had before called my life. And that was my music. And I used to say, music is my life. And now I say, music is a really, really important part of my life. And I think that that was a shift that I had that like made me remember that those human elements are not only an important element of art, but they are art within itself, So I think that that's like such a huge thing to remember is like go outside and like feel the sunshine and like do something different, break your routine, open yourself up to circumstance, say yes when that circumstance makes itself presented to you, and that's such a core factor to some of the things that we make in our lives with the time that we have here.
Make your life art, Yeah.
Indeed.
Instead of just making art. It's like, yeah, I relate to that totally. That's great.
I think that was a beautiful way to close, was make your life art,
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been a blast.
Oh, you guys are rad.
Thanks Thanks so much. It's rad to be on it. I love your podcast, and I was psyched to be on it. So I'd like to talk to Alex on it too. Like he's
Thanks for inviting me on. It was good to talk with you guys today.
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.